Why did her voice sound so calm, when every word meant the end of men on the ground? The radio cracked, broken by static, but the defeat inside it carried through clear enough. "Command, this is Ares 1. The objective is lost. I say again, objective is lost. We are compromised at the dam." Then silence. Then quieter, colder. "It's too late. Ares 1 out." Major Reed, call sign Valkyrie 11, sat alone in the cockpit of her Thunderbolt II at 20,000 feet. The night was wide and empty, black as a cave, but her world was green light and symbols, a lattice of altitude numbers, fuel gauges, range markers, the hum of her engines, the taste of oxygen mixed with ozone, her gloved hands steady on the stick and throttle, unmoved by the words she had just heard. But she felt them settle in her bones like old ghosts. She glanced down at her thermal pod display. The dam wasn't just a waypoint on a mission card anymore. She studied it for weeks, memorized the bends of the gorge, the patterns of rock and shadow, and now in the grainy feed she saw what command couldn't. Heat signatures moving in clusters, small flares of white against the black stone, seals huddled behind concrete walls on the western abutment, enemy fighters closing from 3 sides, pinching them into a kill box. Command's voice broke through again, sharp and professional. "Valkyrie 1-1, confirm copy. Mission terminated. Extraction no longer viable. Disengage immediately. Return to base." She pressed her transmit switch. "Valkyrie copies. Ares 1 reports objective lost." "Affirmative," came the reply, sterile and final. "You are to return to base. Acknowledge." Return to base. She let the words sit in her helmet. To any other pilot, they meant survival. They sounded like betrayal. She looked at the photo taped to the canopy frame, a young man with her same gray eyes, too young to know the war would eat him alive. Daniel, her brother, lost on a different ridge in a different war after command had done the same thing, called off air support. Too risky. Already lost. She remembered the voice then, calm and distant, telling her it was too late. The feed showed the SEALs still holding their fire, waiting, conserving ammo, blind to the net tightening around them, men about to die. Her hand slid from the radio switch to the guarded toggle on her stick. She flipped the cover up. The arming switch glowed. A single black button waited. She took a breath, then evenly into the mic, "Command negative." Silence, not just in the headset but inside her too. The silence of a rule broken, of a line crossed. The warthog dipped its nose and began its descent. Hours earlier, before dawn at Air Base, the air had smelled of hot kerosene and dust. Had walked the flight line in that dim blue haze, performing her pre-flight like a priestess walking a ritual. Her aircraft, tail number 780,615, squatted under floodlights, ugly and, to younger pilots, it was a relic. To her, it was the only thing that had never lied. She traced rivets with her fingers, checked panels the crew had already signed off, touched the massive nose where the GAU-8 Avenger cannon lived. A gun so large the plane had been built around it. Voices had drifted over, 2 lieutenants leaning against a crate sipping coffee, Jake Raptor Mitchell confident grinning, Viper his echo. "She checks that thing like it's about to fall apart on the taxiway." "Probably is. Things older than my dad. Why do they keep them flying?" "Because nothing else does what they do," Raptor said, though his tone was mocking. "Still, Major Reed, she's a relic flying a relic, all by the book. Never seen her crack a joke, never seen her hurry." He smirked. "It's like she's permanently stuck at half speed." Had heard them, but she hadn't reacted. She had crouched by the nose of her aircraft, eyes on the drum-fed ammunition system. Calm, deliberate, silent. They saw a quiet major in her 40s. Flight suit immaculate though worn at the cuffs. Lines at her eyes. A scar along her jaw, hidden by her collar. To them, she was a placeholder in the squadron roster, counting days to retirement. They didn't see the woman who once ejected low over a jungle, survived fire, and kept flying. They didn't see the warrior who still carried a promise in her chest. She climbed the ladder into the cockpit, touched the corner of Daniel's photo, sealed herself inside. The world narrowed to gauges and switches, the only place she ever felt whole. Now that same cockpit vibrated with purpose as the A-10 dropped toward the canyon. The gorge walls rose on either side like ancient cliffs ready to swallow her whole. The warthog, mocked for its lack of speed, was in its element now, a predator hugging the terrain. Her heart stayed steady, her hands calm. Slow, that was a matter of perspective. She remembered briefing 2 days earlier. Colonel, uniform creased sharper than a blade, ambition in his eyes. PowerPoint slides, satellite imagery on a cold screen. The plan is straightforward, he'd said. Trident team will halo in at 200, secure the turbine hall, plant charges on the couplings. 2 F-16s will remain at altitude for response. A surgical strike, low risk. He'd spoken of the dam as data points, of enemies as icons, his voice confident, unquestioned. And she, sitting in the back, had raised her voice. Calm, quiet. Colonel, your plan overlooks thermal dead zones in the gorge. The enemy has operated there for years. It's perfect terrain for staging, radio blind, heat masked. Trident could walk into an ambush. The room had murmured. Raptor smirked. Viper shook his head. A low-level A-10 passed through the gorge, suicide. Smile tightened. With respect, Major, we don't fight bygone wars. We have drones, satellites. We leverage technology. We don't risk assets on hunches. She had held his gaze. Sir, if they hide on foot, you won't see them. Not until it's too late. He had dismissed her. The plan is set. Your role is high-altitude overwatch. Stay out of the way, clear. Crystal, she had replied, though her jaw clenched. Now, looking at her thermal display, she saw what he had refused to believe. White-hot figures massing on the ridges, seals boxed in, the canyon a trap. Her thumb hovered over the trigger guard. Below on the ground, Chief Warrant Officer Mark, Ares 1, was pinned with his men. He pressed himself against cold rock as enemy fire chewed the walls above them. He had just transmitted their defeat to command. He had given up. Then the sound came, a roar that rattled stone. He craned his neck upward. Against the thin slice of sky between cliffs, a shape appeared. Wide wings, twin engines high on its tail. Impossible, an A-10, inside the gorge. Who the hell is this? Identify yourself, he screamed into the net. No answer, only the growl of engines. Then the tearing thunder of the Avenger cannon. For less than a second, the sky ripped apart. A torrent of depleted uranium shells turned a ledge and 3 enemy fighters into dust. 1 second, there had been an RPG team lining up to kill his men. The next, nothing. His men stared in shock, breathed into the radio, his fury replaced by awe. Hold your fire, that's friendly. No, not just friendly. A ghost, a phantom tearing a hole in their apocalypse. High above in the operations center watched his flawless plan unravel into chaos. Drones useless, feeds scrambled, his seals pinned, and the one pilot he had dismissed, the quiet major he had told to stay out of the way, now flying inside the canyon, rewriting the battle. Get me Valkyrie 1, he barked. She has severed comms, sir, a young officer replied. She's below minimum safe altitude. His jaw clenched. She has disobeyed a direct order. She is endangering a $20 million asset. But the truth was simpler. Reed was the battle now. Inside her cockpit, she ignored the chaos. Her world narrowed to crosshairs, heat signatures, angles. She saw the DK heavy machine gun on the ridge pinning the other half of Trident, a weapon the satellites couldn't see, a problem only a close support pilot could solve. Ares 1, she cut across the net, her voice level almost cold. You have a heavy machine gun nest 300 meters east. I'm rolling in. Not a request, a fact. The canyon lit up with tracer fire, red and green lines clawing at her from every side. To the seals below, it looked like suicide. 2, it was geometry. Each tracer had an origin, a line. Her job was to fly between them. Rounds thudded against her titanium bathtub cockpit. Warnings flashed. She pushed lower, down into the gorge itself below the enemy. A maneuver no manual prescribed. A ghost rider carve. For 10 heart-stopping seconds, she vanished from the enemy's sight. Then, erupted from the abyss behind the machine gun nest. Her thumb squeezed off a ripple of rockets. Fire blossomed across the ridge, detonating ammunition, silencing the gun in a chain of fireballs. On the ground, and his men stared, not just at a pilot, at a commander. She saw the whole field. She anticipated threats before they did. He keyed his mic. For the first time, his voice carried no resistance, no command, only respect. "Valkyrie, what's your next target?" In the command center, the words fell like a bomb. A Navy SEAL officer yielding tactical control to a rogue Air Force major. Chain of command shattered. His face flushed with fury. Get that man on a private channel, remind him who's in command. But a civilian contractor, old, stooped, watching quietly, spoke instead. "She's not rogue," he said. "She's a ghost rider." The room went silent. Few remembered the 33rd Tactical Support Squadron, the canyon hunters of a forgotten war. But Reed had been one of them, and she was showing the world why. How could they have dismissed her warnings so easily? How could a room full of decorated officers be so blind to what she had seen in the gorge with just one glance? 2 days earlier, in the frigid sterility of the briefing room, the dam had been nothing more than an image on a screen. A jewel of strategic infrastructure, mapped in clean digital strokes. Colonel had stood at the front with his laser pointer, full of unshakable faith in satellites, drones, and PowerPoint slides. "The plan is straightforward," he declared, his voice as sharp as his uniform's creases. "Trident will insert via halo jump at 200, secure the turbine hall, plant charges, air cover on standby at high altitude, surgical strike, low risk, high reward." Applause would not have been out of place. The plan was perfect on paper. From her seat in the back had traced the shadowed scar of the gorge with her eyes. A place where shadows devoured signals, where men could vanish between satellite sweeps. She had spoken, quiet but firm. "Sir, your plan overlooks the canyon itself. They've been operating there for years. It's a staging ground. Thermal and comms dead zones everywhere. The SEALs could be walking into an ambush you won't see until it's too late." A ripple of smirks had traveled through the younger pilots. A warthog pilot lecturing about shadows in the age of satellite reconnaissance. To them, she was a relic arguing for superstition. Smile had tightened. "Major, with respect, this is network-centric warfare. Our technology eliminates risk. We don't send multi-million-dollar assets into canyons on hunches. Your role is high-altitude overwatch. Stay out of the way." Stay out of the way. The words had stung then. Now, as she dove through tracer fire that turned the sky into a lattice of death, they were gone, burned away by the roar of her cannon. From below, the SEAL commander's voice broke through again, urgent, almost pleading. "Unknown aircraft, confirm identity." She ignored him. The only language that mattered was action. Her thermal pod swept the canyon. The bait RPG team was gone, but there, tucked into a fortified ridge, the muzzle flashes of a heavy DK machine gun, spitting fire, pinning half the SEAL team behind worthless rocks. They couldn't move. They couldn't fight back. A textbook strike from 25,000 feet would never touch it. A drone wouldn't even see it. This was the kind of problem only a close air support pilot could solve. Toggled weapons. Hydra rockets armed. She banked low, the canyon walls clawing past her wings, tracer fire reaching hungrily for her fuselage. Her altimeter screamed alarms she ignored. From the ground, it must have looked like suicide. An aging aircraft flying straight into concentrated fire. But to her, it was geometry. Each tracer was just a line, origin, trajectory, gap. Fly where the lines weren't. The warthog shuddered, rounds hammering against titanium armor. The cockpit thumped with the sound of metal meeting metal. She gritted her teeth, eyes fixed on the crosshairs sliding onto the fortified ridge. Her thumb depressed the launch switch. A ripple of rockets streaked forward, unguided but true. A heartbeat later, the ridge erupted in orange fireballs. The heavy gun vanished in a storm of stone and secondary detonations. Inside the canyon, the roar echoed like an angry god. She pulled up hard, body crushed into her seat by G-forces, lungs fighting for air. But her eyes never left the thermal feed. The seals were alive. The canyon floor was theirs again. "Holy," a stunned voice broke over the net. That's friendly air." The SEAL commander's voice came back, stripped of rage now, replaced by awe. "All stations hold fire. She's with us." 700 miles away, in the cool silence of the command center, the moment landed like a hammer. Dozens of officers stared at their displays as the impossible unfolded. The SEAL team was pinned, their mission in collapse, yet a single rogue pilot had just reversed the battlefield with precision no algorithm had predicted. Colonel's voice was a snarl. "She has severed comms, disobeyed direct orders, and is flying into a kill zone. She is jeopardizing this entire operation." But he couldn't look away from the screen. None of them could. A-10 roared out of the smoke, circling wide. She was already hunting for the next threat. The SEAL commander's voice crackled through, steadier now, edged with something else: respect. "Valkyrie, what's your next target?" The question detonated across the command net like a bomb. In that one moment, the chain of command fractured. A Navy SEAL officer had deferred to a pilot he'd never met, a major who had been ordered to disengage. In the command center, silence thickened. A general lowered his coffee cup slowly. A young lieutenant froze at his console, and his face went red, fury blooming across his skin. "Get that man on a private channel," barked. "Remind him who's in command here." But in the canyon didn't need reminding. She had already taken command. Her scan found it, a mortar team on an eastern overlook, lining up to rain shells onto the trapped SEALs. Range closing fast. Her voice was calm, stripped of everything but fact. "Ares 1, this is Valkyrie. Mortar team on eastern overlook preparing to fire. I'm moving to engage." She didn't wait for permission. Her nose dipped. The gorge rushed up. The mortar crew fired first, a panicked, desperate shot. The round burst near her plane, peppering the fuselage with shrapnel. The canopy cracked, a spiderweb blooming across the glass. The fracture spread over Daniel's photograph. She didn't flinch. The HUD cross turned red, locked. She released a single Mark 82 bomb. It dropped silently, seconds stretching into eternity. The mortar crew scattered, but there was no escape. The bomb struck the cliffside. The world erupted in a fireball that shook the canyon to its bones. Her plane clawed skyward, wounded but alive. The crack across her canopy glowed faintly in the dawn. Daniel's smile shone through the fractures, his eyes unbroken. On the ground, silence held for a moment. Then the SEAL commander's voice came through, softer now, as if confessing something. "Affirmative, Valkyrie, but I have to ask, who are you?" She looked once more at the photograph taped above her instruments. She thought of the folded flag, the promise made, the years spent in silence. Her voice was steady, quiet, but unbreakable. "I'm just someone who knows the cost of leaving people behind. Target marked. I'm rolling in." And with that, she vanished into the storm again. Why was the enemy fire changing? Why did it suddenly feel less like chaos and more like a conversation? A deadly, silent dialogue between her and someone she could not see. Circled high above the gorge, her thermal pod scanning every crease of rock. The SEALs below were regrouping, voices calmer now, steadier because they believed in the ghost watching over them. But the enemy wasn't broken. Not yet. Their fire had shifted. No longer wild, no longer desperate. Small disciplined bursts, probing, measuring her reactions. She felt it in her bones someone down there was hunting her as surely as she hunted them. The voice of Ares-1 came through, urgent. "Valkyrie, we've got movement north side of the dam. Looks like a BTR-80 on the access road. Has to be their command vehicle." Her targeting pod slewed east. Heat's signature bright on her screen, 8 wheels, armored, arrogant, rolling into the clearing as if it owned the battlefield. A perfect target, too perfect. Her instincts went cold. It was bait, a piece set deliberately on the board to draw her into a predictable run. She could feel it, the hand of the enemy commander pushing her toward the trap. "Negative," she said quietly into the mic. "Hold your position, something's not right." She ignored the BTR and began scanning the SEALs didn't understand. "Valkyrie, what are you waiting for? It's sitting wide open," Ares-1 pressed, impatience sharpening his voice. Patience. Her eyes narrowed on a shadowed recess near the top of a cliff. Almost nothing there, just rock, cold as the night. She adjusted the thermal gain, pushing the pod to its limit. Grainy static filled the display. And then, faintly, the truth revealed itself. Parallel lines, the square silhouette of a shield, the faintest warmth of cooled steel. A Zu-23 anti-aircraft gun. Twin barrels perfectly positioned. A butcher's blade waiting for her to dive on the bait. "Son of a bitch," she whispered. The enemy commander was clever, but he thought she was just a pilot. He didn't know she had been forged in shadows where rules meant death. Her mind snapped to a plan, audacious, insane, but hers. She toggled her Maverick missile, locked onto the BTR as if she had taken the bait. She rolled into a steep dive, nose pointed straight at the obvious target. In the shadows, she imagined the enemy gunner tensing, waiting for her to slide into the kill box, waiting to shred her in the perfect ambush. Her thumb flicked the hat switch. She broke the missile lock, fired blind. The Maverick dropped, engine igniting with a violent roar. For a split second it flew dumb, directionless. And in that heartbeat she slewed her pod crosshairs onto the hidden Zu-23. The missile curved, adjusted, obeyed. The enemy would see a missile streaking toward their armored vehicle. But in the unseen world of data links, the Maverick had been whispered a new target. Pulled hard on the stick, body crushed by as she broke away. She didn't watch the BTR. She watched the cliffside. The explosion came seconds later, not where anyone expected. A blinding flash lit the rock face, secondary detonations rattling the gorge as the anti-aircraft gun and its hidden ammunition went up in a fireball. The trap was gone. The psychological effect was instant. Below, enemy formations scattered. The probing bursts of disciplined fire devolved into chaos. Panic rippled through their ranks. Their ace had been destroyed by a move they hadn't even seen. On the SEAL net, Ares-1's voice crackled, thick with disbelief. "Jesus Christ, Valkyrie, how did you?" He stopped, unable to finish. Words couldn't touch what he'd just witnessed. Didn't answer. She was already scanning for the next threat. But in the command center, the silence after the detonation was deafening. The officers stared at the screens, watching a single aircraft redraw the battlefield in real time. Colonel looked like a man watching his career unravel. "She's not rogue," a quiet voice said from the back of the room. Sam Sticks, civilian contractor, 60 years old, eyes tired from too many wars. He stepped forward, gaze fixed on the replay of Canyon Run. "That wasn't luck, that was Ghost Rider work." The room went still. "Turn jaw tight, what are you talking about?" Sticks tapped the display, tracing some impossible path. "See that? She masked her heat signature against the river on the descent. That's old magic, Ghost Rider magic, 33rd Tactical Support Squadron. They were deactivated years ago, too unorthodox for modern war. But I know their motto, we go deep so they come home." He nodded towards service record now flashing on the screen. The line was there. Previous assignment, 33rd TSS, Ghost Riders. And beneath it a dependent notation, Daniel Reed, Sergeant, KIA. The puzzle pieces slid into place. His face darkened. His perfect plan had collapsed, and the quiet major he had dismissed was now commanding a battlefield with skill no algorithm could predict. Back in the canyon, thermal pods swept across the battlefield. Enemy positions that had moved like chess pieces minutes ago now dissolved into scattered pawns. The hunter who had been trying to read her had lost his queen. Her voice, when she keyed the mic, carried the calm of inevitability. Ares 1, enemy mortar team eliminated. Anti-air threat neutralized. Next move is yours. There was a pause, a silence filled with awe and surrender. Then's voice came back, stripped of authority, filled with trust. Solid copy, Valkyrie. What's your next target? And in that moment, the battle's command shifted. Not to the colonel in his sterile war room, not to the network of screens and drones, but to a woman in an aging warthog, flying on instinct and promise, her brother's ghost taped above her instruments. The enemy had wanted her gone. Command had wanted her silent. The younger pilots had wanted her forgotten. But she was still here. And for the first time in 20 years, she wasn't just saving men from fire. She was turning the fire outward. Why did the words echo so sharply? Why did 3 simple lines from the ground, Valkyrie, what's your next target, feel heavier than all the orders she had ever obeyed in 20 years of flying? It wasn't just a question. It was a transfer of trust, a surrender, a battlefield concession that stripped the old chain of command bare. Reed had not asked for it, but it had found her. Her A-10 banked above the gorge, engines howling as dawn's first pale light spilled across the fractured landscape. Smoke curled in thin ribbons from the ruins of the mortar team she had just erased. Her canopy was fractured, spiderweb cracks crawling outward from the point where shrapnel had kissed the glass. But Daniel's eyes in the faded photo still looked back at her, unbroken, steady. Below, the seals were on the move again. She watched their heat signatures cluster, scatter, then cluster again, a disciplined tide rolling forward under her shadow. They weren't just surviving anymore. They were advancing. And yet knew the fight was only beginning. Her scan caught flickers of movement on the northern ridges. Enemy fighters weren't routing, not all of them. Small groups moved with intent, setting up fields of fire, probing her flight patterns. The mind directing them hadn't vanished. He was still down there somewhere, adapting. The duel wasn't finished. It had just shifted to a new board. Ares 1, she keyed the mic, her voice calm. Your next threat is a machine gun nest on the south overlook. Marking target, stand by. Her nose dropped. The warthog dove low, engines screaming, tracers rising to meet her. She slid between them, geometry and instinct guiding her hand. The cannon thundered, ripping the nest apart in less than 2 seconds. She pulled up sharply, the canyon walls scraping past her vision. From the ground, it looked impossible. From her cockpit, it was inevitable. The seals surged forward, leapfrogging positions. Strikes cleared each obstacle before it could fully materialize. To them, it must have felt like walking inside the shadow of a guardian angel. Each threat erased seconds before it could tear them apart. But wasn't thinking about angels. She was thinking about shadows. She saw the gorge not just as a battlefield, but as memory. The smell of dust in the cockpit, the weight of silence after a final transmission, the sound of her brother's voice calling from a ridge, pinned, terrified, waiting for her to break orders and save him. That had been 20 years ago, and she hadn't disobeyed then. She had obeyed. She had listened to command, orbiting helplessly while Daniel's platoon was cut apart by RPG fire. She had heard the screams. She had heard his final call dissolve into static. She had flown back to base with fuel still in her tank and death still in her headset. It had been the defining failure of her life, the reason her room remained barren, the reason her silence became a fortress, the reason she taped his photograph to her canopy every single time she flew. And now, as the seals pressed toward the dam, she felt the same words whisper from the gorge below. Pinned down, can't move. But this time she wasn't following orders. This time there was no one above her voice. Valkyrie, Ares one's voice cracked through, sharp with urgency. We're pinned again. Heavy fire from the main control room overlooking the turbine hall. Can't advance. Can't retreat. Fatal funnel, we're stuck. Pinned, fatal funnel. The word slammed into her chest. For a heartbeat, the cockpit wasn't filled with glowing instruments and tracer lines. It was filled with Daniel's voice. Valkyrie Actual, this is Ranger 26 Bravo. We're pinned down, taking heavy RPG fire. We can't move. We can't. The memory ended, as it always did, with silence. A silence she had carried like a scar. Her grip on the stick tightened. The old guilt, the old rage, surged through her like fire. She could feel the storm building, pressing against the cracks in her calm. Her voice, when it came, was terrifyingly level, a blade of ice over a volcano. Ares 1, what's the composition of that wall? Static confusion, then his reply, reinforced concrete 2 feet thick. Why? Get a man with a laser designator, put a spot on the center, then get your team as far back as you can, behind the turbines, now. You can't penetrate that with a strafe. It's impossible. Do it, she ordered. No explanation, no room for argument. On the dam's exterior, a tiny red dot of light appeared. Eyes locked onto it. She rolled her A-10 into a vicious arc, lining up her run. Not for a bomb, not for a missile, for the cannon. Her mind was quiet now. This wasn't just another strike. This was an answer 20 years in the making. The Avenger roared. 30mm shells drilled into the concrete, not as explosions but as molten fury. The rounds superheated the wall, turning it into liquid shrapnel. They punched through, carrying fire and metal into the control room beyond. From the outside, it looked impossible. From the inside, it was devastation. The SEALs watched as the thick wall sprouted a perfect smoking hole. Through it, the control room was nothing but ruin, shattered consoles, molten steel, silence. For it was more than destruction. It was release. For 20 years she had carried Daniel's silence. For 20 years she had borne the weight of obedience over promise. Now, with the roar of her cannon, she had answered it. She had attacked not just the wall of the dam, but the wall of her own guilt. Inside the turbine hall, the SEALs moved quickly, planting charges on the massive generators. The mission, once a certain failure, was back within reach. But as the final charge was set, a grinding groan filled the chamber. Klaxons blared. Red lights flashed. "Sir, they've triggered a full spillway release," a demolitions man shouted. "All gates opening. We can't stop it from here. They're going to flood the entire valley." On the net, Ares one's voice came urgent, sharp. "Valkyrie, enemy, initiated catastrophic release. We need you to destroy the hydraulic manifold. Eastern top level exterior. It's our only shot." Stared at her display. Fuel low. Ammunition dwindling. Airframe and bleeding smoke. She was exhausted, body aching, soul hollowed by the storm she had just unleashed. But the job wasn't finished. She could feel Daniel's eyes on her, even through the cracks in the glass. The promise wasn't about comfort. It wasn't about career. It wasn't even about survival. It was about finishing the job. Her voice came through steady, flat, stripped of everything but resolve. "Solid copy, Ares 1. I'm on it." She banked the dying warthog toward the dam. One last run. One last impossible task. And deep down, Reed knew. This was where her war would end. Why did the cockpit suddenly feel so small? Why did every vibration in the stick, every warning light flickering on the HUD, feel like a countdown she couldn't stop? Reed's A-10 was bleeding. Smoke curled from her port engine, alarms chattered like nervous birds. Her ammunition count dwindled on the screen, 2 Mavericks left, a handful of rockets, cannon rounds at 30%. Fuel dropping into the red. And yet she pushed lower, closer, defiant against every law of survival. The dam rose before her like a scar carved into the earth, steel and concrete holding back a sea of weight. The spillway gates were grinding open, massive teeth tearing apart the valley's fate. Water thundered in white fury, frothing down the gorge. If the seals couldn't stop it, thousands of villagers downstream would be swept away. Valkyrie, Ares, one's voice cut in, ragged from exertion. We're on the charges, but we need that manifold destroyed or this valley is gone. Can you? His voice broke under gunfire. The calm went ragged, then returned. Can you get us that shot? Didn't answer with words. She rolled her warthog into a hard bank, nose dipping toward the eastern exterior. The manifold gleamed faintly on her targeting screen, thick steel piping feeding the hydraulics that controlled the spillway. One good hit would cripple the system. One good hit could save the valley. But as she lined up the shot, her threat receiver wailed, a long, shrill scream that froze the blood in her veins. A-10. Missiles. Her display lit up with multiple launches. Trails of heat streaked up from hidden ridges, converging on her like arrows from every direction. She yanked the stick, flares blasting from her wingtips, a cascade of burning magnesium. The A-10 rolled, engines howling, the world a blur of water and stone. Two missiles veered off, fooled by the decoys. But one stayed true, homing in, a line of death cutting across the sky. Impact. The missile struck the starboard engine in a bloom of fire. The warthog lurched sideways, alarm screaming. Teeth slammed together, blood filling her mouth. Her vision blurred, the horizon spinning. But she refused to let go. Her hands clamped on the stick, fighting the crippled bird, coaxing it back to level. The engine was gone, but the warthog wasn't finished. Neither was she. Her breath rasped in the oxygen mask, shallow, ragged. Pain flared sharp along her ribs, cracked, maybe broken. Her canopy trembled under the stress. The cracked photograph above her shimmered in the smoke and haze. Daniel's face blurred, then sharpened. Always there, always watching. Her radio buzzed with the SEAL commander's voice, panic-laced with desperation. "Valkyrie, you're hit. Pull off. You won't make another run." Wiped blood from her lip with the back of her glove. Her voice, when it came, was steady, almost frightening in its calm. "Negative. I've still got ordnance. That manifold isn't going to hit itself." She rolled into the dive again, one engine dragging, the other screaming at max thrust. Her HUD shook with vibration. The targeting pod flickered, struggled, then locked onto the manifold. "Come on," she whispered, coaxing the crosshairs. "Stay with me." The steadied. Her thumb pressed the release. A maverick leapt from the rail, streaking straight into the manifold's steel belly. The explosion rippled through the dam like a heartbeat. Flames blossomed, metal twisted, hydraulics ruptured in a geyser of smoke and sparks. The spillway gates froze mid-motion, locked in place. The torrent slowed, weakened, stopped before the valley could be erased. On the ground, the SEALs cheered. For a moment, the gorge was filled not with gunfire but with the roar of survival. But didn't celebrate. She knew the fight wasn't over. The enemy commander, whoever he was, wouldn't let this end without blood. Her warning system wailed again. More launches. MANPADS. Dozens. Every hidden fighter had revealed themselves now, their last desperate strike. Trails of fire streaked upward like furious comets. Her flares were gone. Her chaff was gone. She had nothing left to fool the missiles. For a fraction of a second, considered ejecting. She saw herself pulling the handles, blasting skyward, floating helplessly down into the canyon, where dozens of rifles waited to tear her apart. And she thought of Daniel, how he had died, waiting for someone who never came. No. She wasn't leaving her bird. She wasn't leaving her men. Her mind snapped into a clarity she hadn't felt in years. Every angle, every trajectory painted itself across her vision. She could see the sky not as chaos but as geometry, each missile a line, each gap a path. Her hands moved with a precision that felt almost divine. She rolled, cut throttle, dove, climbed. Missiles screamed past her canopy, bursting in white-hot flares of wasted fury. One clipped her wingtip, tearing metal like paper. Another detonated behind, rattling her cockpit with concussive thunder. She flew through them like a ghost. On the ground, the SEALs watched in stunned silence as the aging warthog danced among death, weaving through trails of fire like a predator born for it. In the command center, jaws hung open. Colonel stared at the screens, unable to reconcile the impossible with the woman he had dismissed. Sticks whispered under his breath, half prayer, half declaration. "That's Ghost Rider work. Nobody else alive flies like that." His plane emerged from the storm of fire, battered, smoking, but alive. The missiles were spent. The trap had failed. She keyed her mic, voice low, ragged, but unbroken. "Ares 1, your path to the extraction point is clear. Move now, I'll cover." "Copy that," the SEAL commander said, awe threading through his words. "We're moving, and Valkyrie," his voice softened, "we owe you everything." She didn't answer. She couldn't. Her throat was tight, her chest on fire, her ribs screaming. But more than that, Daniel's memory pressed against her like a hand on her shoulder. She wasn't done yet. Her instruments flickered, dying. Fuel gauge dipped near empty. The warthog was breaking apart around her. And still, she turned back toward the gorge. Because Reed had promised once, and this time she would not leave anyone behind. Why did her cockpit sound so loud now? Why did every alarm, every warning tone, seem to scream not just of failure, but of finality? Reed's warthog was dying. The starboard engine was gone, its housing trailing fire and smoke. The canopy was cracked, instruments flickering, the whole fuselage rattling like a wounded beast refusing to collapse. Her ribs ached with each breath, every inhale sharp and wet. Her gloves were sticky, blood, she realized, though she couldn't say when it had started. But her eyes never left the gorge. Below, the SEALs were moving. She watched their heat signatures bounding in tight formations, leapfrogging positions, every step covered by her shadow overhead. They were battered, exhausted, but they were alive, because she was still here. "Valkyrie, this is Ares 1, the SEAL commander's voice came through, strained but steady. "We're approaching the secondary extraction point. 5 minutes, just 5 more, can you hold?" Keyed the mic. Her voice was hoarse, thin but calm. "Copy, 5 minutes." She didn't say what she knew, that her bird didn't have 5 minutes left. Her HUD flickered again, ghosting images. The radar warning receiver pulsed faintly, weak signals, but they were there. The enemy wasn't finished. They were regrouping, desperate, determined to erase what she had done. And then she saw it. 2 trucks bouncing along a northern road, their outlines faint but unmistakable. Technicals, each carrying mounted DK heavy machine guns. They were rushing to cut off the SEALs' path. If they got into position before the SEALs reached extraction, the valley would become a killing field. Her thumb brushed the last weapon on her rack, one Maverick, her final precision strike. She locked onto the first truck, released. The missile streaked away in a white line of vengeance, slamming into the lead vehicle. Fireball. The truck was gone, scattered in fragments across the gorge floor. But the second truck swerved, accelerating, gunners already aiming their weapon down toward the SEALs. Its weapons page blinked empty. No missiles, no rockets, just her cannon, 30% left. Her body screamed at her to stop, to pull back, to save what little remained of herself. But her mind was steel. She dipped the nose, lined up the run. The Avenger roared. A line of fire cut through the valley, chewing the truck into molten ruin. The explosion sent the gunners scattering into silence. The SEALs pressed forward, their path clear. From below, Ares 1's voice came again. "Valkyrie, you've just given us our exit. We're 2 minutes out." 2 minutes. Leaned back in the seat, chest heaving, blood dripping down her jaw. Her vision swam in and out of focus. She glanced at Daniel's photograph, still taped to the canopy, fractured but unbroken. His smile seemed sharper now, clearer through the cracks. She thought of the promise she had made at his graveside. "I won't leave them, not like you were left." For 20 years she had carried that vow. Tonight she had lived it. Her warning receiver shrieked again, sudden, vicious. Missile lock. Her eyes snapped to the horizon. A faint plume of smoke rising from a ridge far to the west. Not a MANPADS this time. Bigger, faster, radar-guided. SA-18 maybe. Something smuggled in, saved for the final blow. The missile tore toward her like fate itself. She slammed the throttle forward, what was left of it yanking the stick, flares useless, chaff gone. The missile screamed closer, her cockpit filling with alarms, lights, chaos. In that moment she didn't see the missile. She saw Daniel. She saw the ridge where he had died, the silence that had followed, the folded flag in her mother's hands. Her lips parted. Words formed, though no one could hear them. "I'm sorry, Danny. I tried to come for you. I tried." The missile closed. She braced. And then detonation, but not hers. The missile blossomed into a fireball midair, ripped apart by a stinger streaking up from the valley below. Her radio crackled, a voice shouting over gunfire and wind. "Valkyrie, that was us. One of my boys took the shot. You're still flying. You're still with us." Her chest shook with a sound, half laugh, half sob. For once, someone had been there for her. For once, the circle of abandonment broke. But she knew the truth. Her plane was minutes from failure. Systems were collapsing, fuel nearly gone. She could escort the SEALs to extraction maybe, but she would never make it back to base. Her hand brushed Daniel's photo, fingers trembling. She whispered into the cabin air, voice too faint for the radio. "I'll take them home, that's enough." Below, the SEALs burst into the clearing, the extraction bird already dropping fast, a Chinook thundering low, rotors scattering dust. They piled aboard, one by one, covering each other until the last man leapt inside. Ares One's voice came, breathless, urgent. "Valkyrie, we're loaded. We're clear. Get yourself out of here." Banked one last time, circling above them. Her warthog's shadow swept across the clearing, wings steady though the airframe rattled apart. She keyed the mic. Her words were slow, deliberate, almost like a confession. "Negative, Ares One. My bird won't make it home, but you will, and that's the only thing that matters." A pause, silence. Then the SEAL commander's voice broke, raw, stripped of the soldier's armor. "Valkyrie, don't you dare leave us now. Not after this." She smiled faintly, though blood trickled from her lip. Her vision blurred, but her voice stayed steady. "Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts." She banked again, engines screaming, the gorge below bathed in dawn light. One last guardian circling above the men she had saved. The Chinook rose, lifting the SEALs out of the valley. Watched it climb, her vision dimming, her own bird shaking apart. She whispered one last time, barely audible even to herself. "Danny, I brought them home." Her hand stayed firm on the stick. Her eyes stayed on the sky. And Reed, Valkyrie 11, kept flying into the light. Why did silence feel heavier than gunfire? Why did the absence of explosions, the sudden calm, press harder against the heart than the chaos ever had? The battle for the gorge was over. The dam stood crippled but intact. The valley was safe. The SEALs were alive, their extraction bird thundering skyward, and Reed, Valkyrie 11, circled alone in the rising dawn. Her cockpit groaned with every movement. Metal rattled, systems failed one by one, alarms pulsing like a slow heartbeat. Her starboard engine trailed black smoke, flames licking its ruined edge. Her left wing was ragged, perforated by shrapnel. The canopy's spiderweb cracks turned the sunlight into shards of fractured light. She was flying a ghost. In the Chinook below, the SEALs pressed to the open ramp, helmets off, eyes lifted. None of them spoke. They watched her circle, watched the battered silhouette of the A-10 carve loops against the sky. One of the younger operators muttered, almost in disbelief, "She's not trying to land, is she?" Their commander, Ares-1, shook his head. His jaw was clenched tight, eyes red. "She's giving us cover, even now, even when there's no one left to fight." The words hung in the air, a truth none of them wanted to face. She wasn't flying to survive, she was flying to finish. Thousands of miles away in the sterile command center, the same truth sank like a stone. Dozens of officers sat frozen before their displays, watching the impossible unfold. Colonel stood rigid, face drained of color, his voice gone. Only Styx spoke, quiet, reverent. "She's riding it in. That bird won't make it home, she knows it." The silence deepened. Not the silence of strategy or hesitation, but of mourning, for a woman still alive, still fighting, who had already stepped beyond them. In her cockpit, adjusted her straps, breath shallow. Every rib ached with fire, every inhale scraped raw. Blood smeared across her oxygen mask, thick on her gloves. Her hands trembled on the stick, though her movements stayed precise. She glanced once more at the photo taped above her. Daniel's grin, forever young, forever frozen on the day before his last patrol. The crack across the glass split his face in two, but his eyes still met hers, always steady, always waiting. She remembered the folded flag, her mother's silence at the graveside, the way the bugle had cut into her chest. She remembered the years of distance, the empty walls of her home, the career that became a sentence instead of a purpose. All of it had led here. And now she had kept her promise. Her radio crackled, the SEAL commander's voice strained, desperate. "Valkyrie, this is Ares-1. We're clear of the AO, we're inbound to safety. Break off and head south. You can make it to friendly airspace if you try. Do you copy?" She keyed the mic. Her voice was soft, almost tender. "Negative, Ares-1. This bird's not crossing that line, not today." "Damn it, Valkyrie," his words broke, ragged with something beyond protocol. Not a commander to a pilot, a man to the stranger who had just saved his life. "We can come back for you. Give us a grid. Give us a chance." Her lips curved faintly, the ghost of a smile. "Some things you don't come back from. I knew that when I came into this valley. Just take care of them, all of them. That's the only thing that matters." Silence, then his voice again, low, almost breaking. "We won't forget you, not ever." She clicked her mic once, the smallest acknowledgement, then let go. The Chinook climbed, banking away. The SEALs leaned out the ramp, helmets clutched, eyes locked on her shrinking figure. Some saluted, some prayed, some simply watched in silence, unwilling to blink. Banked her A-10 higher, circling the gorge in widening loops. The rising sun bathed the valley in gold, smoke curling like incense from the shattered ridges. The world below was wreckage and silence, but it was alive. Her instruments failed one after another. Fuel gauge bottomed. Hydraulic pressure dropped to nothing. The stick grew heavy, sluggish, as though the bird itself was tired of carrying her. She whispered to it, a habit from the Ghost Rider days, words only another pilot would understand. "Easy, girl, just a little longer. We'll put this down right." She thought of Daniel, his last words, his silence. For 2 decades she had carried the unbearable weight of not being there for him. But tonight, for these men, she had been. And somehow in that exchange, the weight eased. Her vision blurred, blood loss, fatigue. The horizon wavered, doubled, but she held on. She couldn't let go, not yet. In the command center, a young lieutenant whispered, "She's not trying to eject." Styx answered softly, voice thick, "Ghost Riders don't punch out unless they have to. They ride it in." Colonel said nothing. His perfect plan was ashes. And in the ruins, Reed, the major he had dismissed, silenced, ignored, had carved her name deeper than any of his commands. Above the valley turned her bird one last time. The smoke, the ridges, the river, all of it lay beneath her like an open hand. Her hand brushed Daniel's photo, fingertips smearing blood across the faded ink. Her lips moved, a whisper swallowed by the roar of the failing engines. "I brought them home, Danny. I did what I couldn't do for you." Her eyes closed for a beat. When they opened, there was no fear left, only quiet. The A-10 dipped, wings steady, nose lowering toward the valley floor. The engines coughed, sputtered, but still carried her forward. She guided the bird with gentle hands, every movement tender, almost reverent. Not a crash, not a fall, a descent, a farewell. In the Chinook, the SEALs watched her silhouette shrink, then angle downward. None spoke, none breathed. They knew what they were seeing. In the command center, officers removed their headsets, some wiping eyes, some simply staring. Sticks bowed his head, murmuring something only he could hear. And Reed, Valkyrie 11, Ghost Rider, flew her final circle, guiding her dying bird into the dawn. Why did the world look so peaceful now? Why did the valley, by fire and battle, glow like something holy in the first light of dawn? Reed's A-10 rattled as if every bolt wanted to flee. The port engine coughed, the starboard trailed fire, and her instruments had long since gone dark. Her bird was no longer flying on mechanics, but on will. Her will. She eased the stick forward. The nose dipped gently, wings leveling as the warthog began its final glide. She could feel the airframe weakening beneath her touch, each vibration sharper, more insistent. But her hand stayed calm, tender, almost like she was putting a child to sleep. The Chinook was distant now, banking south, carrying the SEALs toward life. Their commander's last words still echoed in her headset, "We won't forget you." And in that silence spoke back, though she knew they couldn't hear, "That's enough." Her breath was shallow, each inhale stabbing her ribs, but her mind was strangely clear. She thought of Daniel, his laugh, his reckless grin, the way he had slung an arm around her shoulder the day before he shipped out. She thought of the silence that had followed, the years of guilt, the endless nights staring at a photo she could never bring herself to take down. She thought of the men she had saved tonight, how their voices had shifted from panic to trust, how they had looked skyward with belief instead of despair. And for the first time in 20 years, she felt the silence loosen its grip. Her canopy reflected the valley below, jagged ridges, curling smoke, the dam and crippled water foaming white where it spilled. It looked less like ruin and more like memory, like a place where ghosts could rest. She touched Daniel's photo one last time, her blood smearing the edges. Her voice was barely a whisper. "I didn't leave them, not this time." The warthog groaned as the glide steepened. She guided it toward an open stretch of riverbank, wide and flat enough to accept the weight of a dying bird. She wasn't thinking of survival anymore. She was thinking of dignity, of finishing the circle. The ground rushed up. Her heartbeat slowed. Her eyes closed for a fraction of a second, then opened again, steady. And Reed rode her bird into the earth. The impact was thunder without echo, a blossom of fire curling against the dawn. For a moment, the valley was filled with smoke and silence, as if the world itself bowed its head. In the Chinook, every SEAL turned to the window. They saw the fireball bloom, saw the smoke coil into the morning sky. None spoke, none moved. One of the younger operators removed his helmet, pressing it against his chest like an offering. Their commander, Ares 1, stood at the ramp, eyes locked on the rising smoke. His voice was hoarse, breaking as he said the only words that fit, "Godspeed, Valkyrie." In the command center, dozens of screens went dark. For a long moment, no one breathed. Even Colonel couldn't summon a word. The battle had ended, but not in any way he had planned. Sticks broke the silence. His voice was quiet, reverent, almost like a benediction. "She brought them home, that's all she ever wanted." Some of the younger officers bowed their heads. Others turned away, faces wet. For once, the war room felt less like a machine and more like a chapel. The SEALs, Chinook, thundered south, carrying the men who would live to tell the story. In the cabin, silence held them, heavier than armor. Each man replayed the same image in his mind, a battered warthog circling, refusing to leave, flying until it could not fly anymore. And they knew they would carry her with them, in every mission, in every night when the silence pressed too hard, in every choice between obedience and humanity. Reed would be there. She would not be forgotten. Far below, the wreckage of her A-10 smoldered by the riverbank. The flames curled upward, fatting into the morning light. Above it, smoke rose in a column, black against the gold of dawn. For those who saw it, it looked less like wreckage and more like a signal, a reminder. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.